Chevrolet built some of the most beautiful, most powerful, most legendary machines in American automotive history. The 1969 Camaro Z28, the 1970 Chevelle LS6, the original Stingray Corvette. Cars so good-looking, they belonged in museums. But here's the thing nobody talks about. For every masterpiece Chevy created, there was a disaster waiting in the shadows. A bloated, rubber-bumpered, federally mandated eyesore that made enthusiasts weep into their motor oil. Today we're counting down 12 of the ugliest Chevy muscle cars ever built. The machines that proved even the greatest automaker in America could have a very, very bad day. Number 12. The 1971 Chevrolet Camaro. The second generation. Camaro arrived in 1970 as one of the most stunning American cars ever designed. Low, wide, aggressive, and impossibly cool. Car magazines ran out of compliments. Enthusiasts ran out of money trying to buy one. It was that good. Then 1971 happened. Federal safety regulations came knocking, and Chevy answered the door looking embarrassed. The front bumper grew. The rear bumper grew. The overall aesthetic went from razor-sharp Predator to something that looked like it had spent too long sitting in a waiting room, eating vending machine food. The body lines were still there underneath all the padding, but finding them required serious squinting. The problem wasn't the Camaro's fault exactly. Washington had started mandating 5-mile-per-hour impact bumpers, and automakers scrambled to comply. Chevy's solution added visual bulk to a design that had survived entirely on its slender proportions. The chrome bumpers clashed with the bodywork in ways that looked unresolved and rushed because they were. Performance had already started sliding too. The high compression engines that made the 1970 Z28 a legend were being strangled by emissions requirements. So, the 1971 Camaro looked worse and went slower. A double insult nobody ordered. To be fair, the second-generation Camaro recovered its dignity by the mid-70s with some clever restyling. But that first year of federally mandated bloat, it belongs on this list. It was the moment you could see Chevy's designers staring helplessly at the regulations on their desks, knowing the golden era was ending and there wasn't a single thing they could do about it. Number 11. The 1980 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. Speaking of things nobody ordered, by 1980, the Camaro Z28 had developed a serious identity crisis. The performance was still there, barely, clinging on like a man holding the edge of a cliff with 2 fingers. The 350 cubic inch V8 was still under the hood, officially rated at 190 horsepower, which, compared to what the Z28 had been producing just a decade earlier, was frankly a cry for help. But the performance numbers weren't the ugliest thing about the 1980 Z28. The ugliest thing was what Chevy's designers decided to do with the exterior. Graphics, mountains of them. Decals, stripes, and tape schemes that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never actually seen a racetrack but had watched a lot of television commercials about racetracks. The hood wore a massive Z28 decal that seemed to announce, loudly and desperately, that yes, this was still a performance car. Please believe us, we're begging you. The body itself wasn't terrible. The third-generation Camaro shape that arrived in 1982 would actually be quite handsome. But the transition year between the old design and the new one left the 1980 model in an awkward visual purgatory. The proportions felt stretched in the wrong places. The roofline sat too high. The whole car had the energy of someone wearing their older siblings' clothes, and the colors available didn't help. The late Malaise-era palette ran heavily toward shades that can only be described as harvest gold, avocado green, and what appears to be sadness in metallic form. The 1980 Z28 tried so hard to look fast that it forgot to actually look good. There's a lesson in there somewhere. Number 10. The 1974 Chevrolet Corvette. This one physically hurts to talk about. The Corvette had spent the late 1960s and early 70s as one of the most beautiful objects on 4 wheels. The Stingray body was a genuine work of art, sharp, sensual, and impossibly aggressive. Carroll Shelby once reportedly said that the Stingray was the only American car he'd ever been genuinely jealous of. That's high praise from a man who wasn't exactly shy about loving American iron. Then came 1974, and with it, the federally mandated 5-mile-per-hour rear impact bumper. Chevy's solution was a rubber-covered rear end that looked like someone had attached a decorative boat fender to the back of a supercar. The elegant pointed tail of the earlier Stingrays was replaced with a blunt, rounded, apologetic-looking rear section that seemed to be making excuses for itself. The front had already received similar treatment in 1973. By 1974, both ends of the Corvette were wrapped in what can only be described as protective sadness. The side profile still looked magnificent. The Stingray shape was so inherently beautiful that even Chevy's compliance engineers couldn't completely ruin it from the side. But approach the car from the front or the rear, and the magic evaporated entirely. Worse, 1974 was the last year for the iconic side exhaust pipes. The visual drama of those pipes sweeping out from behind the front wheels had been one of the Corvette's defining design statements since 1969. Gone, replaced by conventional exhaust routing that exited at the rear like a perfectly normal car that wasn't special at all. The 1974 Corvette sold just fine, because Corvette always sold just fine, but it remains one of the most heartbreaking visual compromises in the car's history. Number 9. The 1987 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS Aero Coupe. Now, here's a car with a fascinating backstory that makes its ugliness almost forgivable. Almost. Chevrolet built the Monte Carlo SS Aero Coupe for one reason, and one reason only: NASCAR homologation. The rules required manufacturers to sell a minimum number of street-legal versions of any body style they wanted to race on the oval tracks. So, Chevy took the Monte Carlo SS and added a sweeping fastback rear window that replaced the standard notchback design, creating a more aerodynamically slippery profile at high speeds. On the racetrack, it worked brilliantly. The Monte Carlo dominated NASCAR in the mid-1980s, winning race after race. Off the racetrack, it looked like someone had taken a perfectly respectable coupe and accidentally sat on the rear end until the glass sloped at an angle that nature never intended. The fastback window created a rear section that seemed visually disconnected from the rest of the car. The Monte Carlo's formal roofline had always been part of its charm, a big, comfortable American coupe that happened to have a performance badge. The Aero Coupe threw that visual coherence straight out the window. Well, through the window, aerodynamically. The practical consequences were equally unkind. The sloped rear glass made the trunk opening comically small. Rear visibility was genuinely compromised, and because the window collected heat like a greenhouse in August, rear seat passengers spent most of their time quietly reconsidering their life choices. Only 652 Aero Coupes were built in 1987, which suggests that most buyers looked at the standard Monte Carlo SS, looked at the Aero Coupe, and made what can only be described as an obvious decision. Number 8. The 1973 Chevrolet Chevelle. The 1970 Chevelle LS6 was the car that redefined what an American muscle car could be. 450 cubic inches, 450 horsepower, and quarter-mile times that made Corvette owners nervous. It was righteous, brutal, and completely magnificent. 3 years later, the Chevelle looked like it had discovered an all-you-can-eat buffet and never looked back. The 1973 Chevelle was big. Not big in the confident, wide-shouldered way that muscle cars were supposed to be big. Big in the way that suggested someone had inflated a perfectly good design with a bicycle pump and forgotten to stop. Federal bumper regulations again demanded larger front impact absorbers, and the Chevelle's new nose wore them with all the grace of someone trying to hide a traffic cone under a dress shirt. The body styling had moved away from the crisp, purposeful lines of the 1970 model toward a softer, more rounded aesthetic that was trying very hard to appeal to everyone and succeeding at appealing to almost nobody. The chrome was everywhere, layered on like the designer had been paid by the pound. The greenhouse was too tall, the rear end was too blunt. The whole car communicated comfort and compromise rather than speed and aggression. Performance had followed the aesthetics downhill. The LS6 engine was gone entirely. The most powerful engine available in the 1973 Chevelle was a 245 horsepower, 350 cubic inch V8 that would have embarrassed the 1969 model on the same drag strip. The Chevelle nameplate soldiered on until 1977. But the 1973 model represents the clearest visual break from the car's glorious past. It's the moment you can point to and say, that's where the magic left the building. Number 7. The 1975 Chevrolet Nova SS. There is something uniquely depressing about a performance badge on a car that cannot perform. The Nova SS had been a legitimate street weapon in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Small, light, and available with big block power, the SS Nova was the original sleeper, the car that looked like nothing and went like everything. Gearheads loved it. Insurance companies hated it. The formula was perfect. By 1975, the SS package had become something closer to a costume, a visual suggestion of performance wrapped around a car that was fundamentally compromised by emissions regulations and fuel economy concerns. The available engines had been neutered to the point where even the top V8 option struggled to generate excitement. 0 to 60 times that would have embarrassed a well-motivated garden tractor. But let's talk about the look specifically, because the 1975 Nova SS wasn't just slow, it was also awkward. The Nova body had been designed in the early 1970s as a utilitarian compact, which is a very different brief from muscle car. The SS trim added stripes and blacked-out trim and some aggressive badging, but beneath all that decoration, the basic shape was still just a boxy compact car wearing a Halloween costume. The proportions were all wrong for a performance car. The greenhouse was too upright, the hood was too short. The overall profile communicated practicality and sensibility rather than aggression and speed. It looked like the kind of car that would very responsibly signal before changing lanes, which, to be fair, it probably would. The SS package on the 1975 Nova was a reminder that you can badge your way into looking like a performance car, but you cannot badge your way into actually being one. Number 6. The 1977 Chevrolet Corvette. Let's get something straight before we go any further. The Corvette is sacred. It is America's sports car. It carries 70 years of racing heritage, engineering ambition, and national pride on its fiberglass shoulders. Criticizing a Corvette should require paperwork, a waiting period, and at least 2 character references. But the 1977 model, we need to talk. By 1977, the Corvette had been wearing the same basic body since 1968. 9 years. In automotive terms, that's roughly an eternity and a half. The design had been freshened several times along the way, but each refresh seemed to add a little more visual complication without adding any clarity. The 1977 model arrived wearing an exterior that had accumulated so many small changes, so many compromises and adjustments and federally mandated modifications that the original elegance had been smothered under layers of good intentions. The chrome was excessive. The 5-mile-per-hour bumpers, front and rear, continued to haunt the car's proportions. The interior had been updated with a cockpit layout that looked busy and slightly confused, like someone had rearranged all the furniture during the night and wasn't sure it was better. And the performance? The base engine made 180 horsepower in a Corvette. The car that had once offered 435 horsepower from the L88 was now producing numbers that wouldn't have alarmed a Toyota. To be clear, the Corvette's bones were still there. The chassis was still capable. The driving experience was still engaging. But visually and dynamically, the 1977 model represents the malaise era at its most uncomfortable. It's the Corvette that looked tired. And that was a very strange look for America's sports car. Number 5, the 1980 Chevrolet Citation X11. Okay, deep breath. In 1980, Chevrolet decided that the future of performance was front-wheel drive, transversely mounted 4-cylinder engines, and a hatchback body borrowed from their economy car lineup. They called the performance version the Citation X11. And they genuinely believed it would appeal to people who had previously been buying Camaros. Take a moment with that. The Citation X11 was not a muscle car. It was not even adjacent to a muscle car. It was a front-wheel drive economy hatchback with a sport suspension package and some decals on the doors that were apparently doing their absolute best under the circumstances. The base engine was a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder producing 90 horsepower. The 1970 LS6 Chevelle produced 5 times that number from one car, made by the same company, separated by a single decade. Visually, the Citation X11 looked exactly like what it was, a compact economy car that had been given a performance package it neither deserved nor could adequately support. The body kit added some visual aggression, but in the same way that putting a top hat on a Labrador Retriever adds sophistication. The intent is there, the execution raises questions. To be scrupulously fair, the Citation X11 handled reasonably well for its era. The front-wheel drive layout kept it predictable, and the sport-tuned suspension gave it some genuine enthusiasm in corners. But calling it a muscle car was the kind of creative licensing that required a very imaginative definition of the word muscle. The Citation X11 was Chevy waving the white flag and hoping nobody noticed. Enthusiasts noticed. Number 4. The 1978 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. The Camaro Z28 returned for 1978 after a 3-year absence, and the automotive press celebrated its comeback with genuine enthusiasm. It had a 350 cubic inch V8. It had performance suspension. It had a genuine racing heritage that the base Camaro could only dream about. It also had the graphic design sensibility of a Las Vegas casino in 1978, which, if you've ever seen a Las Vegas casino in 1978, you'll understand is not a compliment. The exterior treatment involved a combination of body color paint, contrasting hood accents, and a tape stripe package that ran along the lower body in a pattern suggesting the designer had recently consumed several energy drinks and had access to an unlimited supply of striping tape. The Z28 graphics were bold in the way that a foghorn is bold. Nobody was going to miss the message. The message being, this car would very much like you to know it is a Z28, and it intends to keep reminding you at every possible visual opportunity. The disco era's influence on automotive design cannot be overstated. 1978 was peak peacock, the year when restraint was considered a character flaw. And Chevy's designers, bless them, were absolutely children of their time. Underneath the visual noise, the Z28 was actually a decent performance car by late 70s standards. It could reach 60 miles per hour in around 8 seconds, which was respectable for an era when most performance cars had been well and truly defanged. The handling was competent, the exhaust note was satisfying, but those graphics, those glorious, terrible, unmistakably 1978 graphics, they belong in a time capsule alongside Mood Rings and the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. Number 3. The 1982 Chevrolet Camaro. The third generation, Camaro arrived for 1982 with genuine promise. The new body was sleek and aerodynamic, a genuine visual leap forward from the rounded, bumper-heavy design it replaced. Road testers praised the Aero efficiency. The drag coefficient was impressive by early 80s standards. It looked genuinely and without irony like a modern performance car. Then you opened the hood and found the Crossfire injection system. Chevrolet's Crossfire injection was a fuel delivery system that managed to combine the mechanical complexity of fuel injection with the actual performance of a carburetor, while achieving the reliability standards of neither. It used 2 throttle body injectors mounted on a cross-flow intake manifold, and it looked impressive enough under the hood that buyers assumed it was doing something meaningful. It was doing something, just not the thing they were hoping for. The 200 cubic inch V8 with Crossfire injection produced 145 horsepower, in the car that had once been a genuine drag strip weapon. For context, there are riding lawnmowers today with more attitude, but the visual awkwardness of the 1982 Camaro went beyond the engine bay. The interior, despite some genuine effort, felt cheap in ways that were hard to ignore. The dashboard was a sea of black plastic that looked fine in photographs and slightly depressing in person. The T-top roof, while genuinely popular with buyers, created a structural situation that expressed itself through squeaks and rattles on anything other than perfectly smooth pavement. The Z28 version tried to compensate with styling addenda that included ground effects and a prominent hood bulge, but the effect was somewhat undermined by the knowledge that underneath that aggressive bodywork lived 145 horsepower, trying very hard not to make eye contact with its heritage. The third-gen Camaro would eventually find its stride, but not in 1982. Number 2. The 1976 Chevrolet Chevelle Laguna S3. The Laguna S3 deserves special recognition because its particular breed of ugliness required genuine engineering effort to achieve. Chevy didn't stumble into making the Laguna S3 look like this. They worked at it. The Laguna was built on the Chevelle platform and was intended as a NASCAR homologation special, similar in concept to the later Monte Carlo Aero Coupe. To improve aerodynamics on the high-speed ovals, Chevy's designers created a new front end that featured a sharply raked urethane nosepiece that swept from the leading edge of the hood down to a point somewhere near the ground. The intent was to split the air cleanly and reduce drag. The result looked like the front end of the car had melted slightly in the sun and been left to cool in an inconvenient position. The urethane nose was technically innovative and genuinely functional at racing speeds. On the street, parked next to normal cars in a shopping center, it looked like the automotive equivalent of a ski jump. The dramatic slope of the hood leading into that protruding nose created proportions that the rest of the car's fairly conventional body couldn't reconcile. The front end looked like it was trying to escape from the rest of the vehicle. The interior offered nothing that compensated for the exterior's visual drama. Standard Chevelle instrumentation, standard Chevelle seating, standard Chevelle everything, wrapped in a body wearing one of the more controversial front ends in American automotive history. Performance was adequate. The available V8 engines provided reasonable acceleration, but the Laguna S3 never achieved the racing success its radical nose was designed to enable, which left it carrying all the visual controversy with none of the competitive justification. It is a deeply strange car, which, in a list of ugly cars, is somehow the most impressive achievement of all. Number 1, the 1980 Chevrolet Corvette. Everything eventually comes back to the Corvette. You can build 12 entries on a list of Chevy's visual low points, and somehow, inevitably, the Corvette finds its way to the top. Not because Chevy didn't care about the Corvette. They cared deeply. That almost makes it worse. The 1980 Corvette represents the absolute nadir of the C3 generation. The body had been in continuous production since 1968, 12 years. The designers had been adding and subtracting and adjusting and complying with regulations for so long that the original Stingray's breathtaking clarity had been entirely buried under accumulated compromise. The front end wore those federally mandated rubber bumpers with an air of resignation. The rear end matched them in enthusiasm. The side exhaust pipes were long gone. The hidden headlamps, once so dramatic when they flipped open at the press of a button, now seemed to take considerably longer to operate, as though the car itself was reluctant to reveal what was coming, which, given the engine situation, was understandable. The top engine available in the 1980 Corvette in California was a 180 horsepower version of the L48 V8. 180 horsepower. The 1967 L88 had produced 435 horsepower, officially. In reality, considerably more. The 1980 Corvette in California was producing less power than some contemporary station wagons. But the visual story is the real headline here. The 1980 model wore its age heavily. Every surface had been through multiple iterations of revision, and nothing quite agreed with anything else anymore. The interior was equally troubled, a combination of design elements from different eras that had never quite managed to form a coherent conversation. Chevrolet knew it. The C4 Corvette was already in development by 1980, and the engineers and designers working on it were essentially running toward the exit as fast as their slide rules would carry them. The 1980 Corvette was a car waiting to be replaced, wearing that expectation openly and without much dignity. When the C4 arrived for 1984, cleaned up, purpose-built, and genuinely modern, the contrast with what came before was so stark that it almost made the 1980 model look worse in retrospect. Almost. It had managed that entirely on its own. The 1980 Corvette is number 1 on this list, not because Chevy failed through carelessness or indifference. It is number 1 because Chevy tried hard, cared deeply, and still produced something that looked like a masterpiece that had been left in a garage for 12 years and quietly accumulated the damage that time inflicts on all things beautiful. It is a cautionary tale wearing fiberglass, and somehow, even in its compromised state, even bloated and rubber bumpered and emissions strangled, you can still see the ghost of what it once was underneath all of it, which is either deeply sad or deeply romantic, depending on how many Corvettes you've owned. Probably both. Chevrolet built legends. They also built these. And here's the thing about ugly muscle cars. They tell you just as much about American automotive history as the beautiful ones do. The regulations, the economics, the cultural pressures, and the engineering compromises that shape these designs are the same forces that shape the entire industry. Every rubber bumper tells a story. Every strangled V8 carries a history lesson. The ugly cars matter. They just matter differently. If you love the complete, complicated, sometimes embarrassing story of American muscle, hit subscribe, because there is so much more where this came from.